So today I just wanted to show you how easy it is to go about making a quilt. And a lot of people think quilting is something that's difficult, it's hard to do, and they don't ever really give it a try. But it's not that difficult, it's a lot of fun, and what I would advise is start out with something simple, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. It's a simple square quilt. It's about as simple as you can get. It's made up of different embroideries on different colors of pink squares. And so the first thing you need to do is cut out your fabric. Get all your squares ready. And so what you do is just choose, I don't know, 7 colors of any fabric that you like in this scheme. And this is for a little girl, my godchild Amelia. And so what you do is you iron all your fabric, you wash it, you dry it, and then you iron it out, make it all nice and flat. Then you take it and you lay it out, and you can layer up to 3 layers of fabric at once, and you put down your square. And this is a 9-inch square, and it's got 1/4-inch seams built into the square, so it's really a 9.5-inch square cut, but when you sew it together it makes a 9-inch square. And then you lay it down, and with a rotary cutter you cut on all 4 sides. It's really simple. So you want to know how many squares you're going to need for your quilt. For my quilt I need 32. And it's not hard to cut. When you can cut 3 out at a time, the squares come really fast. So you cut everything out. I'll just put this away really quick right by my batting. And then you lay everything down. And what I've already done is I've sewn most of the squares together already just to speed things up. But you will get the idea. Oops. Looks like I have a pin stuck in there already. You lay out all your squares. And what I would do is I would lay out the entire quilt, all the squares for the entire quilt. And for me, since I'm working in such a small space, I am laying the quilt out on the kitchen floor or on the living room floor. Make sure you sweep first. And that's just so you can really organize everything. And what you do is you start connecting your squares. So you would lay right sides together, but since I'm working on this chain, I will put this right here. So right sides together. And then you're going to sew up on this side so that when you open it up, you have another section of your chain. So what you do, and since this is 9.5-inch squares, the sides should line up perfectly. And that's one thing that's really important when you're quilting, lining up your squares as you're pinning. It's really important to have precise results and precise sewing. So just pin everything together. Make sure your fabric's flat and you're meeting up both sides together. And there you go. And one thing you can do before you sew everything up is kind of open it and just make sure everything's going the right way, because it's so annoying when you sew something up incorrectly and you have to get out the seam ripper and rip out the seam. So what I'm going to do right now is get out my sewing machine and sew this up for you. So I'll be right back. Okay, so the next thing you need to do is sew up your seam. And what I have done is I have put my 1/4-inch quilting foot on my machine, and what that is a foot that has a 1/4-inch seam allowance that you can get by using the edge of the presser foot as a guide on either side. And it also has markings to get a 1/4-inch seam or an 1/8 of an inch seam. But it's really important that you have precise sewing results. So it's any extra help you can get to get a perfect 1/4-inch seam is a good thing. So just take out your pins, drop your needle, and sew up the seam. And make sure you backstitch at the beginning and end of every seam to secure it. And whenever you're pulling out a pin, make sure you have your needle down into the fabric so you don't accidentally lose your spot or mess anything up, even though it would be easy to find your place with the 1/4-inch quilting foot. So just pull that, take some scissors, and with these older machines, and this is a nice old machine, isn't it? It does a beautiful job sewing though, and it has done a better job sewing than some of my new, very expensive machines, but I will not get into that right now. And so there you have it. You've sewed this up, and you can see how it has just joined in perfectly, just like the rest. And now you will just take your last square, lay this down, and then right sides together. You'll just pin and sew. Alright, so there you go. And you have your chain of squares. And so now what you'll do is you'll take the rest of your quilt top, and this is the quilt top. I have already sewn together the bottom. You'll lay it out however you can, and if you have to work on the floor to do this, to be able to pin this accurately, that's what I would do. And now you see, if you lay this just right sides together and you sewed it up, you'd be left with the wrong thing. So it's a really good idea to line everything up beforehand. And you'll just lay this down like this. There we go. And now you can see when you would sew it together, everything would be going the right way, and that's really important. Now one step that I'm going to skip on only these two squares, as you can see right here, I've already pressed open this seam. And that is what this little tool is for. It's a teeny weeny little iron, and it's the little tip of the iron, and it's probably the handiest part. But you can see you would just work this apart with your fingers and press it open. So I'm just going to skip that step just for those two squares, and I don't think it'll be too awful. Really, the most important thing that is to have those pressed apart is that when you sew it up, it makes the fabric feed a lot more evenly. So I will pin them open rather than press them open. And what you'll do now is you'll pin this entire length, because you're going to sew this up all in one straight seam, and it will complete the top of the quilt. And that's how you would create the quilt, the different pieces of it at least. So line everything up. And make sure that when you get to a joint between the different layers of fabric that you line it up very well right here, because this is where it will really matter. And you'll be able to tell if you didn't line it up very well once it's sewn up. It's not the biggest deal though. Alright, so now that you have everything all pinned, you're just going to go ahead and sew it up. With a 1/4 inch seam, everything's 1/4 inch seams for this quilt. And for most quilts actually, it makes it really easy to sew these things up. So just make sure you put everything away, out of the way, so you can have a nice even feed of the fabric. Got my foot and my needle. I'm just going to pile this all up right here. Take out my first pin and sew it up. Now when you come to these joints in the fabric, just help it all sew under nice and even. And drop that needle if you have to, and raise the presser foot and just make that lay nice and flat. You don't have to, but it's nice to do that. And there you have it. The entire quilt is, well, the quilt top is done. And you would create a back in the exact same way. Now, what I have to do in order to show you the next part is go over to the living room and put everything down on the floor, because it's the only space that I have that's big enough to do the next step. And I'll see you over there.